everybody, and welcome to CX Today. My name is Charlie. I am the senior editor here, and I'm thrilled to bring you a discussion centering on the 2024 Gartner Magic Quadrant for Contact Center as a Service. And joining me for that conversation are two very special guests. Yesterday, I'm delighted to be joined by Dave Michaels, the lead analyst at Talking Points, and Nerys Scoffield, the director of Injection Consulting. Now, thanks very much both for joining me, and let's get right on into the conversation. And the place where I want to start is by popping up the 2024 Magic Quadrant matrix on the screen for everybody to see. And in the top right-hand corner, we have our market leaders. In 2024, as in 2023, those are NICE, Genesys, AWS, and Five9. And in the bottom right-hand corner, we have the visionaries, and this year that's Talkdesk. And then in the top left-hand corner, those are the challengers, and that's Cisco this year. And then in the bottom left-hand quadrant are the niche players, which consist of Content Guru, 8x8, and Vonage. So not much movement this year. All we really have is Cisco going from niche player to challenger, and Content Guru going in the other direction. So Gartner has positioned these vendors on the matrix based on their ability to execute, which is the y-axis, and their completeness of vision, which is the x-axis, following a long and thorough evaluation process. And it'd be great going to hear both of your thoughts on this year's top takeaways on this from this year's report. I don't know, Dave, if we could maybe start with you.
It's a great I love this report. And it's important to understand that it's Gartner's opinion of these 9 vendors. It's nothing more than that. It's Gartner's opinion. I would say Gartner has a very interesting place where they have a lot of access to data, a lot of access to the vendors. So it's a really valuable opinion, but it's just an opinion. And so no big surprises. I think that Gartner's opinions have been pretty clear in this space for a while. No big movements. You mentioned the 2 quadrant moves. But, all in all, this report looks pretty darn similar to last year's report, which looks pretty darn similar to the previous year's report. So nothing, I would have liked to have seen maybe more changes in the vendors that were added, that covered. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more on the changes in the industry that are occurring, maybe in the text, but it is what it is, and it's a great report.
Absolutely, and I think that's interesting. We will touch upon a little bit of the inclusion criteria a bit later in the video. I don't know, Nerys, maybe if you want to share your top takeaways with us next.
Yeah, I think to Dave's point, it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy the way they act at the moment, because Gartner dictate what they want and the criteria that they want the vendors to deliver to get on the quadrant. It's life or death to the vendors where they are positioned. And so they service the needs of Gartner. So it's unsurprising that new vendors aren't coming onto it. It's unsurprising that there's that little movement. I mean, I suppose interestingly in the background, we've got new analysts now assessing the quadrant, and they state that there's new criteria, but I can't see that much new within the criteria that they're looking at. And
well, I think it's interesting because let's bring the conversation onto the point of inclusion criteria. I think, we have, to be honest, as you mentioned, it hasn't changed in a few years despite the movements of the market. I think one thing I might like to see a bit more within it is to focus on integrations with other systems as well. I know you've also picked out a couple of other things there, so I don't know if you could maybe share those.
Well, in terms of the entry point criteria, I think that's something that people don't really understand. That people are like, oh, why isn't this vendor on it? And it's like, well, because they don't meet the entry criteria. So 66% of Gartner's revenues are coming from the US. Over 50% of its people are in the US. So it's unsurprising then that perhaps anything coming from Europe is underrepresented. But the fact that you have to have feet on the street from a marketing perspective across three of the key territories that they outline. I mean, how relevant is that to an awful lot of the buyers? I think they've got themselves in a muddle, to be honest with you. I think 15,000 of their customers are enterprise customers at Gartner, and yet a lot of the CCaaS vendors, as outlined in their report, service mid-market. So I think they're in a bit of a muddle, really. So yeah, the fact that it's got to have feet on the street, the fact that they've got to have £71 million revenue coming in from licenses, and 50% of those have to come from inbound. Yeah, the fact that they have to have 20% year-on-year growth, that's an interesting one that personally I think drives an unintentional consequence to the buyers. So I think there's a lack of understanding and clarity on.
There definitely is a lack of understanding. I've just been watching the social media feeds on this. A lot of people think that you have to pay to be on this report, and that's a whole nother conversation. But the way this really works, and what Nerys is referring to, is they have this inclusion criteria that determines which vendors get in the report, and if you meet the inclusion criteria, you're in the report, period. It has nothing to do with whether the vendor wants to be in the report or not. If they meet the criteria, they're going to be in it. And so, I'm a little more cynical. I think that the way that this is probably done, and probably the way that I would do it if I was writing this report, is I would think about who I wanted in the report first, and that would be based legitimately on the kinds of calls and inquiries I was getting. And I would come up with some sort of list, let's say of 9 providers that I think should be on the report. And then I would spend a lot of time coming up with some objective inclusion criteria that gets me those 9 vendors. And I think that is what she's referring to. I mean, they've come up with all these really very complex set of requirements, more so than most Magic Quadrants, I might add, about their technology and how it works, about where they have people, about how many employees they have, what regions they have, all these characteristics, and they come up with these 9 vendors, and that's okay. I'm okay with that. I really am okay with that. What I'm not okay with is that the market is changing so much in the last couple of years, and it has become, between AI and between where the CRM vendors and the hypervisors are going, that it seems strange to me that the 9 vendors really haven't changed. I expected some additions and drops.
And let me pick you up on that point there, Dave. I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit more about some of the changes in the market which you believe could have caused more of a shake-up of the report.
Well, that's an interesting question. And so what I was referring to was the amount of change that's occurring in the industry. I would have expected to cause a little more shakeup on this report. And so the big changes that are happening in the industry, of course, are AI based. And so a lot of AI, I would say, it's become it's consuming the vendors. And so the vendors are all prioritizing AI. And the report does not give AI a lot of attention. In fact, the report plays down AI to some degree. The other big thing that's happening is the industry has somehow gotten together and agreed that they're not CCaaS anymore, they're CX. And the report doesn't really talk about that and really what is being conveyed in that change. And so when I look at those two changes, CX plus AI, I think that there should be a little more shakeup in the vendors. And so in particular, the hypervisors, right? So you've got Amazon on here. You don't have Microsoft isn't in here yet. They're not going to be in here for a while based on the revenue requirements, et cetera. But those, again, if Gartner were to relaunch this report, and I suspect they will the next couple of years or even sooner, they might relaunch it as a CX Magic Quadrant. And then they'll reset that inclusion criteria that Nerys was talking about. And we may see revenue go away completely, right? Because it's going to be more about all these different capabilities around CX. So I think the hypervisors, all 3 of them, all have contact center plays, and we've only got one on here. And I think the intersection with CRM, specifically Salesforce, is becoming the elephant in the room on this report. And particularly, we just had Dreamforce, and they had a big thing called Agentforce, and they're clearly moving. They've been stepping or inching toward the CCaaS more and more, and now CCaaS is inching more towards CRM. So those are going to intersect. So once you start looking at hypervisors and CRM, then it opens up a whole bunch of questions, like Zendesk or ServiceNow and things like that. So I think we're going to see a pretty big change in this report in the next few years, but that change will involve the name of the report as well.
Agreed. Yeah, no, I totally agree with Dave on that. I think it's so difficult for buyers at the moment because they've trying to understand that intersect point between the CRM solution and the CCaaS solution, and the demarcation points of functionality between them is becoming more and more blurred, those lines. And so it wouldn't surprise me if this is, like Dave said, completely overhauled, to consider the likes of Zendesk and Salesforce, and Pega and Sprinkler and those guys who are servicing much broader. But then you've got to also recognise that there's more players moving into the UCaaS plus CCaaS. Still don't have a total clear name on that. And I do understand that that Gartner are starting to look at that. But again, that means that then Zoom get to play, they've got a huge commitment on their contact center. They're probably not going to come on here for a while with the criteria as it is. But it's an interesting one.
And there's another thread in here that you can pull around UCaaS, and as your colleagues over at UC today know, Gartner also published the Magic Quadrant for UCaaS this month. Normally these don't publish the same month, but they coincidentally post the same month. One of the recurring themes in this CCaaS report that we're talking about is they keep talking about consolidating vendors. And they say that's a major driver of what's happening in the CCaaS space is consolidating vendors, whether it's multiple contact center solutions or different solutions for workforce engagement or other parts of the suite. So I think it's really, there's a disconnect that's happening with UCaaS, right? So if consolidating vendors is important, then UCaaS also factors into that equation. And the previous versions of this report, Charlie, you mentioned that Cisco popped up into another quadrant, but the previous version of this report had all the UCaaS companies, which are 8x8, Vonage, and Cisco, in that bottom left quadrant. This year, Cisco is out of that quadrant, and NICE, who's up on the top right, has added UCaaS. And so there's still this disconnect between, they don't really talk about consolidating vendors with UCaaS, but the chart is kind of showing that is a trend that's happening that needs to somehow be addressed it should be addressed in this report.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point as well, because they do talk about convergence with the kind of customer engagement CRM report that they have, but the UCaaS isn't mentioned as much as you say. And I think that's a really good point. And I mean, there's lots of really great discussion around this already, and we can talk maybe a little bit more too about kind of why there's maybe less movement. But I think it's an important conversation another important conversation to have. Is how CCaaS buyers should actually be leveraging this report. So Nerys, I don't know kind of how you would maybe respond to that, and maybe if there's any other sorts of places that buyers should be looking to kind of get information on their CCaaS implementations.
Yeah, and obviously, I only see the top line overview, but I think Gartner say that 20% of what is in the research that they've done, and there's no, I absolutely know and understand that the diligence that they put into understanding these 9 vendors and where they are in terms of roadmap is very, it's really robust. But is it more robust than some of the end customers that I've worked with and the procurement that they undertake? Probably not. Does it help being supplemented by Gartner peers? Probably not. So I think buyers should understand the process that Gartner undertake to determine the output of here. I think they should look really closely at some of the things that are highlighted as the weaknesses in the vendors, because some of those should be table stakes, some of those cautions. You read those as an end user in operations and you go, what? Can't do like basic native reporting? Can't deliver a basic dashboard? That's a problem to me. But the reality is Gartner drive growth over just getting the basics right. So the cautions, in my opinion, are a consequence of organisations like Gartner driving innovation and growth. It's like, just get the fundamentals right, guys. That would be great. And then we wouldn't have to unpick all of the stuff that's going on in operations. So I think buyers should defer to it. I think they should understand those top line strengths and weaknesses, but I think they should absolutely conduct their own procurement based on their very exacting use cases, because what Gartner are looking at might not be, and is unlikely to be, very specific to where they're at the moment and where they want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know, Dave, if you would add anything to that.
Well, the only thing I'll mention is that there's another report called the Critical Capabilities Report. The weights that Gartner uses to evaluate, they evaluate a vendor across a whole spectrum of things, and they have different weights. And what the Critical Capabilities Report does is it adjusts those weights for different kinds of use cases. Now, unfortunately, the Magic Quadrant report doesn't tell us the weights. And so we don't really know, for example, if global coverage is more important than, say, analytics. And so it's really hard for a customer to use this Magic Quadrant to align with their important criteria, or the criteria they consider important. And so it's a very difficult report to leverage. The Critical Capabilities Report, which is a companion to this, at least slices it differently. So you can say, well, global is really important to me. So let's look at that global use case. And then the vendors are re-ranked in a different way. The scores didn't actually change. The way Gartner evaluates these providers stays the same. What changes is the weights. And so you can get a little better idea of what's important, but nobody knows what's important in this particular, in the Magic Quadrant report itself.
Which is tricky then, isn't it? It is tricky. And again, serving different markets, they serve, Gartner serve enterprises, and yet there's a lot of talk about the vendors in here that service mid-market. So it's like, well, that's not really your customer base then, Gartner, is it? Because your customer base is enterprise. So there's a bit of a disconnect there as well. So I think mid-market should also really be conscious of that, and really not make the decision that I'm only going to go with a vendor top right. The vendors that are in the top right, all the vendors on here are very, are good in their own right, and they've got some very strong credentials and credibility. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other vendors that should be considered, particularly for European buyers. And it doesn't mean that these are the be-all and end-all. So I think you've got to cast your net a bit wider, and don't just say, well, the board really like it when Gartner says, it's like, well, do your own homework.
Absolutely. I think do your own homework, as well as considering those weaknesses within the Magic Quadrant, is a really great message to end on. It's been a fascinating chat, lots of good and thought-provoking discussion. So I want to thank Dave and Nerys very much for joining me today, and also for everybody watching as well. Bye for now.